Oh, we have 4 commissioners, so we do have a quorum. We have Kevin Carroll and Charlie Holman, or Charlie Stoudemire, myself, and you. So.
Oh, I see. I had to change my view.
Yeah.
Hey, Kevin.
Jonathan, how are you?
Good.
Jim, I know Betty said she wasn't sure she was going to be able to make it. So,
Okay.
and if she was going to be late. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I talked to Elaine a few minutes the other day, and she didn't indicate one way or the other.
okay. Well, I know she came by and picked up a hard copy of the UDO. So,
Huh.
I think she was planning to be in attendance.
Did she have a wheelbarrow with her? There's Mr. Hart.
Hello, how's everybody?
Good, Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Hi.
Hey, Tom, just Charlie.
Hey, Charlie, how are you?
All right.
Don.
Hey, Jonathan.
Jesse, I was going to use the clock on your computer to start this, but I can't find it, so I'll use the clock on my computer.
Okay.
And we'll call this meeting to order. First order of business, the approval of minutes from our meeting on January the 25th. Do I hear any additions, corrections, or to those? Hearing none, we'll accept them as sent out. No public hearings, no old business, new business, new street names, Jesse?
Well, we were supposed to have one for the Central Avenue townhomes, but we don't have enough road names yet that don't have conflicts with existing road names. I'm waiting on some more options. So instead of just approving the one name we do have that doesn't have conflicts, I figure we can just wait and approve all 3 of them at the next meeting. They're not to the point where they're platting it yet anyway. So it shouldn't make a difference for them to have to wait a month.
Yeah. Okie doke. And that brings us to the discussion of the proposed ordinance to repeal and replace in its entirety the Unified Development Ordinance.
And if y'all don't mind, I'm gonna let Rebecca, our town administrator, kind of lead the discussion on this. She's been in the most discussions with council, so.
Okay. Hey, Rebecca.
Hey, how are you guys? Can you all see and hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hey, Rebecca.
Hey, so it's nice to meet you guys, even though it's just virtually. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today about this. As you guys know, council voted, I believe it was February 4th, to repeal the UDO and replace it with the old ordinances that were in place before the UDO was adopted. They have asked staff to give them suggestions of which parts of the UDO we think are the most important that need to be incorporated back into those old ordinances. So we wanted to ask the boards and commissions who are most involved with it and actually practicing with it for any suggestions or concerns, complaints, anything that you think we should know as we embark on this process. And the thing I will say is, obviously, you can tell us your opinions now, but if it's something that you would feel more comfortable talking with me or with Jesse privately, you're welcome to do that, or you're welcome to talk with your council members also. So I know it's kind of a broad topic, but we're interested in any ideas that you have or anything that you think we should particularly look at.
Well, after watching that meeting twice and almost a third time, the sense that I have is they really don't like all of the standards, the design standards primarily. I think what we have to recommend to them, we keep, and I made a couple notes here, is to replace the old 32-121 through 32-129, which are all of the zoning, the old zonings, R1, R2, et cetera. And we need to replace those with Section 2 districts and Section 3, the use provisions. You can't do one, you can't just put a list of zonings out there without having the use to go with them, which the old ones are sort of incorporated in the same paragraph. And
Okay.
then to go along with that, we need to replace the old 32-322 through 32-324 with Section 8, the tree preservation, landscaping, and screening, because each of those zonings also have buffer requirements when you get in, particularly into the business and commercial zonings. So those were the things that just leapt out at me from watching where they were going with this. Does somebody else have a 2 cents they want to throw in there? Tom?
One of the, just some conversation I've had with some council members and some other interested people who've worked with this is that the concept of UDO for new developments is not really a problem. And it seemed like a lot of the people supported that. It's where they applied the new design standards to the existing areas where there got to be conflicts with, how things look now versus how things are proposed in the UDO. And there's not a lot of flexibility, it seems to some people, in there. So if there's a way to demarcate existing structures and existing areas and make the UDO more applicable to the newer developments coming into town, like the areas out on Maple Street. Some of those developers like the UDO. It gives them a sense of what they need to do, and it's all in the package there. They can go to it and refer to it and design accordingly. But if you applied some of those design criteria to the downtown area, where there's open spaces, it's a mixed bag in how it applies and how it fits in. So those are some of the concepts I've heard from people. And then the second one is relatively minor, is should there be a demarcation between small developments, let's say less than 5 lots, and those over 5 lots in applicability of it. And that's another issue I hear. If somebody has a piece of property they want to subdivide, should they be treated a little bit differently and a little bit less strenuously in some of these requirements than somebody's coming in and putting a 250 lot development in?
Well, that's a simple number change because we already have a provision for 3 lots. Anything 3 lots or smaller is not affected by the design standards, et cetera. So, I mean, if
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
picking a number, how,
Yeah.
And we actually already changed that to 5 because that was brought up previously. So that was one of the first amendments we made, was to change that to 5.
yeah.
Okay.
So currently, if you're building 5 lots or less residential, then you do not have to meet the design requirements for single family homes?
It's less than 5.
Yeah.
The 4 or less.
4, okay.
What is the council's position on this, Jesse?
What is their position on it?
Yes.
I think it varies depending on which council member you speak to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I think that it's probably best if we don't speak for council. And if you guys want to talk with them particularly, you're more than welcome to. I think we're kind of on a fact-finding mission. I think there's, as Mr. Hart mentioned, I think there is some discussion about the non-conforming uses and how you treat existing buildings that don't conform to the the new UDO, and as they get switch property uses or as they switch businesses, how we slowly try to bring those back up to the UDO and that. I think there's definitely some conversation about that to be had. But we're still gathering input from council members right now.
Rebecca,
that
Kevin,
just
Carroll.
speaking?
Mike. Hello?
Go ahead.
This is Elaine. This is
Hey,
Elaine
Elaine.
Siegelkin. Who was that was just speaking?
Sure.
Rebecca. Rebecca
Rebecca,
Bass,
okay.
Town Administrator.
Okay. I didn't recognize Rebecca's voice and
Sorry.
wondered.
Yeah, she's leading our little discussion today.
Okay.
Rebecca, when
Mike,
it comes to a non-conforming use, what role does the Board of Appeals play in that?
So the Board of Appeals the Board of Zoning Appeals, the BZA.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's certain things that they can give variances on, and those variances are guided by state law, and that you have to have the 4-part test that you meet the 4-part test before you can get a variance from the Board of Zoning Appeals.
And is there anything that you can do for a design appeal?
So appealing the DRB's approvals, or
I think so, because they're saying that it's the design rules that the people in the smaller areas find hard to deal with. So is there a way that it can be appealed? Someone can go before a board and say, this is my hardship, this is what I have, this is what I'd like to do?
so there's flexibility now built into the zoning ordinance for staff to do that. I think that one of the things Jesse and I batted back and forth and looked at the way other places have done it, you can make that a little bit more flexible to where staff can kind of work with people. If there's, there are certain lots that are in existence today or buildings that there's just no way they're going to meet certain of our design criteria until they're torn down and another building's built there. So I think there's probably some ways we can make it more flexible for staff to be able to work with people for those. And we're looking at that. And the design guidelines are one of those things to try to work through that and figure out if there's things that are particularly prohibitive for existing buildings and kind of remove those or make them more flexible for existing buildings.
And Kevin,
This is Elaine. This is Elaine speaking, and I wanted to make the comment on record that it was my understanding all the way along as we were working on the UDO that when it did go into effect, that we would spend a number of years tweaking it and making it fit more precisely. That this was more of a broader view that we would need to fine tune. So I was really thrown for a loop, to say the least, when the entire thing was proposed or first reading was held to throw it out. And have difficulty with that because of the fact that the document is an easy one to amend, which we have done some of already, and it lends itself to tweaking and fine-tuning and to address the needs as someone brings them to attention. It doesn't have to happen when an emergent when an example comes to mind or comes before the group or has already happened. It would be nice to be able to work on it, and I'm glad that it appears that we're going to be able to work on it and still keep the UDO. Am I right? As far as, is that what we're working toward right now, Rebecca? Is being able to work within UDO and change the aspects, because I didn't see much direction that council in watching the clip, and I didn't watch it twice.
The direction.
It upset me enough to watch it once. I was not very happy with some of what I witnessed.
I understand. The direction we've gotten is to look at the old ordinance and figure out what parts of the UDO that we could incorporate back in there, the parts that we feel are the most important, that need to be included back into the old ordinance. That's the direction that I have currently right now.
Well, it seems like to me it needs to be the other way around. If there's something in the old ordinance that's not in this new section that needs to be incorporated into the new is so much more user friendly and accessible, and with the illustrations, it's just a more workable document, in my opinion.
Okay.
I got the sense from the recording that town council felt like there was just over-regulation involved with the UDO in terms of its citizens and current inhabitants, as opposed to those that are developers coming into Somerville from out of state or out of the region.
And I think that's a fairly easy fix, because you can make exceptions for existing residents and existing properties.
I didn't get a real sense of why this is the best thing to do. Get rid of the UDO, whether we have any
No,
input or not.
Exactly. It seems to me that a document that has gone through so many public hearings and so many eyes and has had such input from the citizenry in general, and has some very good parts in it, and I think tree protection and things like this, that we need to, there are a lot of things that we need to keep. And as a whole, the document itself is a good framework to work within, whereas the other one is much more difficult, because that's why we embarked on the UDO in the first place, was because the other one was ill-adapted for general use. And just because something is old doesn't mean that it's the best. Even though I'm quite old, and I do consider myself quite nice.
Is there a process by which, when we got rid of the old zoning ordinances and brought in UDO, was there a process that we had to follow specifically? And are we going to be following that process to do the reverse if we're getting rid of the UDO?
The process stems in how the town council repeals and adopts ordinances. It takes 2 readings and a public hearing. They've had the first reading. More than likely, they will expect us to have a public hearing at our next meeting. And then the meeting following that, they can hold a second reading and actually affect the change.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir. Go ahead, Jesse.
I was just gonna say, when we did the UDO, because, we were going through the whole draft and all of that, it was a much longer, drawn out process. We kind of had workshops with Planning Commission all along the way with each chapter, or, a few chapters at a time, that sort of thing. And then, once we finally got to a final draft, then we had, I think it was 3 large public workshops, and then continued discussions with Planning Commission. And then once Planning Commission felt comfortable with it, they sent it to council with a recommendation. After Planning Commission we held 2 public hearings with Planning Commission, and then it went to council, and then council held, I think it was 32 workshops with staff to go over it. And we also, because we were actually changing the zoning districts and the zoning map, we also had to put out signs and all that to let folks know that was changing. And we sent out postcards to over 1,000 property owners that were actually having their zoning kind of completely changed. The ones that changed to the mixed use districts that we didn't previously have. So.
Does anyone have a sense of how the UDO is onerous for current homeowners in downtown historic Somerville?
I'm not entirely sure. We actually made it slightly easier for folks in the historic district because we created 2 separate COAs. One that staff can approve rather than having to go to the BAR. But I'm in all honesty, in terms of like a single family house that's less than 5 lots, we really didn't change any requirements there. We kind of tried to make sure we didn't change those requirements because we knew those, you know, would be the most sensitive ones, which is why we made that. Initially it was 3 lots or more, but we changed it to 5 lots shortly after it was adopted. But that was why we kind of made that allowance because we didn't want to necessarily burden the just like single family homeowner.
Does anyone have any ideas of what the weaknesses are of the UDO in terms of town council members?
I think you'd have to ask them, but how many commissioners actually watched the recording of the meeting, their
I
council?
watched it twice, like yourself. I watched it 2 times.
This is Kevin. I watched it twice too, and I still couldn't figure out what they were really. There's a story behind the story you weren't getting from the video.
Right. There's the Germantown story, which really doesn't seem to have anything to do with the UDO. And then there's the mention of the Salisbury track and the Hoyer tracks, you know, the larger developments where the UDO seems to apply very easily and appropriately.
I would encourage you guys if you would like to reach out to your council members and talk to them about it and get their opinions. The biggest one I've heard is for existing, and I would probably say existing commercial buildings or residential existing that's turning to commercial, that's being turned into it. That sort of non-conforming use thing is the biggest thing we're going to spend a fair amount of our time trying to work on.
Yeah, that area on North Magnolia, North Gum Street, is transitioning. It's almost has transitioned from a single family residence to business, and going from businesses in a house setting to the requirements of the UDO for commercial things. It seems to be there's some conflict in some of those things as people are changing those properties. You'll have a former house right next to something that would have to be developed into a whole new style and basis.
Tom, would you say that's a small number on the grand scheme of things in town? Things like that, the commercial transition?
Well, that's one example. That's one area. That's an example in the downtown area that I think that's given some people trouble. And the transitioning from one to the other. I mean, do we want these standards applied to those lots there, or is there something else? I mean, again, I'm not advocating any of this. I'm just telling you what I've heard. I have lots of conversations with lots of different council members, and I'm still confused. But one of the things I hear too is the detractors of the UDO are going to say this is a cookie cutter document that doesn't apply to Somerville, and even the changes we made doesn't make it fit Somerville to what Somerville is. So it's going to seem like it's going to be hard to appease them to use the UDO downtown. Like I said, I don't hear anybody complaining about applying it out in Maple Street in those new developments out there. It's just the inside the more of the historic area.
I think that exceptions can and should be considered being made to this for those problematic areas, and that could be a more viable solution than tossing the whole document out. Because I think it gives the town some broader tools to work with for the new development that's happening and going to happen very fast. And I don't know that we want that to happen under the old ordinances.
Right. Yeah. And I agree with you on that. I mean, but then you got Jessie, you know, she doesn't know, she needs some guidance, some firm guidance. You know, when a developer comes and wants to develop six lots over there, you know, near the post office versus somebody who wants to develop something out on Maple Street, the ordinances apply equally to both. And so she has to apply them. And if there's going to be, if we see differences or council sees differences, then that's the amendments I think we need to figure out and make. But, you know, again, council needs to give us, you know, more guidance. If we're
I was going to say, I didn't hear much guidance or much willingness to work within this framework.
Mm-hmm. Is there another document out there comparable to the UDO that does, you know, some of the same things, but is more amenable to an existing town?
So, you know, you guys know this, but just for conversation, you know, the UDO is just when it's just a UDO, an UDO is a unified development ordinance. It's just the zoning regulations and the land development regulations put into the same document. So there are towns that have a zoning ordinance and a land development regulation ordinance, and those are two separate ordinances, or you can put it together. What we had before was 4 different chapters of our code of ordinances that were in different places that kind of govern development. So there are many different options of how you can look at where you want to put those different sections that govern development, whether it be in a code of ordinances in a separate document, or, you know, some people still have a zoning ordinance, which does land use and sets out your land use and your zoning, and then has land development, which does your road regulations, your stormwater, your floodplain, your site development regulations. I think that we call, you know, we're calling it the UDO, but there are other places that have a unified development ordinance that call it completely different things. I've been researching some different ordinances, and the Rock Hill ordinance was one I read this weekend. And they just call it zoning ordinance, and it has other things in it like stormwater or landscape regulations and different things like that, but it's in their zoning ordinance. So I don't know if I answered your question, but yes, we could call it whatever we wanted to call it, and you can put whatever things you want to in it. You know, I think there are ways that you can incorporate all of the things together. You want to kind of try to make it easy for people if they're developing their parcel to be able to say, these are the things I need to do if I'm developing my parcel. It's just, how do you best do that? Is that part of your code of ordinances, or is that part of, you know, a separate document? And I think there's some differing opinions on that. And that's kind of one of the things we're wrestling with also.
This is Kevin Carroll. Like Elaine, I like the UDO. I think we need to come up with some sort of method for variances and appeals for those individual situations in the existing town, small places that want to do something, and, you know, it appears that they can't. There has to be some sort of way to do appeals and then a variance for the non-conforming use or whatever.
Historically, it's been one of the easier ways, I think, to get into commercial has probably been to convert a residence that's in a transitional neighborhood like Cedar or North Magnolia or some of these, and to renovate or adapt a home use into an office use. And at many times after a certain point, the structure is no longer viable for office and it gets torn down, and then a new structure is built. I think you can witness that along Cedar Street, where those homes were moved for CPW, for example. And I think that because it's less expensive for a young company or a startup to be able to go into an existing home and convert it to commercial, that maybe that's where part of the problem is. And I think that there ought to be some flexibility in the way the town approaches that, and it should be allowed to happen that way, because eventually, sooner or later, a home is not going to suffice for a growing company for terribly long. So I'm not terribly concerned about that long term. It won't turn into a commercial and then therefore fall under the guidelines of the Commercial Design Review Board and that sort of thing. But there are a lot of neighborhood businesses, and with the new mixed use that we've got, I guess I have such a hard time understanding what the real problem is with it, because it was not clear to me. I don't think there's been enough clarification, and I can't quite imagine how the public is going to react to this either. I have no way of knowing. I've heard from several people who are alarmed by this sudden desire for throwing it out and going back to the old. But other than that, no one seems to quite understand what town council had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Did everyone read Becca Zimmerman's chat box? I'm just going
No.
to read it. Okay. It says, "This is Becca. I facilitate the Board of Architectural Review. I will say that homeowners in the historic district are very happy to not have to go before the bar for paint colors or maintenance items and other minor renovations. People will not be happy to learn that everything has to go before the board, adding months to their timelines for small projects if the UDO goes away. Sorry, I do not have a microphone."
So she's saying the UDO helps her?
She's saying that it might add a timeline, add more months. Yes, she is saying yes.
Yeah,
It's either-
Well,
that's what I was explaining
it
earlier
definitely
about the
does.
different COAs. One is done at staff level and the other goes to the full board.
So I think that's probably a good thing to note, that they're the things that some of the things that the UDO corrected, we need to make sure that they are brought back into the old ordinance if that's what we do.
I'm not real familiar with the old ordinance and the stormwater issues and all of that, but it appears to me that quite a bit of thought, quite a bit of time went into the workings of the new UDO in that regard and in that section. And I believe that stormwater management is going to become more and more of a critical issue for the town. Driving around after our recent deluge of rains, it was hard to see any area that was not in standing water. Yards all over the place, except for mine on Simmons Avenue, which is always dry as a bone. Not a good thing in the summer when you want to grow things, but it's never been under standing water, unlike my property over on Sumter, which is underwater with many rains, and certainly with the past ones. And that was throughout a lot of area that I was driving through. And I think that stormwater issues are not going to diminish, because every tree that gets cut down means less gallons are taken up, not only by the foliage but by the roots and other things, and with as much clearing as going on in the outlying areas, even say as far out as Summers Corner, where so much of that is going on, it's going to have an impact on us as well. So I do have great concern about the stormwater issues and some of the more technical aspects that are addressed, I thought, pretty well in here, and certainly can be tweaked as we need to tweak them.
I believe the stormwater management section was a separate chapter in the old ordinances. So I think we can look at the new ordinance and the old ordinance and see what needs, what could be brought back to the old ordinance to make sure that we're covering all of those things. I don't know that any of the actual standards changed a lot, but we can look at both of those.
All right. I think the stormwater issue is a tremendously important one for us going forward.
Did we get the old ordinance sent to us?
Yeah, you already have it.
Yeah, it's in the packet. So I included the UDO and the old ordinance in the packet.
Ah, okay.
That's why it's 500 pages.
Okay.
It's just really, really, really hard to read digitally.
Yeah.
I have a paper copy and it's hard.
So Jesse, does the UDO start with section 6? It's like page 309 in the out of the 500.
Yeah. So
I've forgotten where the number was.
It ends on page 318 or 322. I don't know which year. And then this is, and again, as Rebecca explained, the old ordinance was in 4 different places. So it's kind of like the flood prevention section came from section 6. Stormwater section. Next was the planning commission section came from chapter 20. The stormwater came from chapter 22, and then all the zoning was in chapter 32. So I just kind of compiled those 4 sections at the back of your packet, starting with 6 and then 20 and then 22 and then 32. I did just want to provide some brief clarification. I know we talked about, having an appeal process and that type of thing for, smaller existing parcels. For our design guidelines, technically the DRB has the ability to approve any exceptions to those. I think the issue lies with the fact that most of those, if they're not changing the appearance of the exterior, they don't have to go to the DRB. So maybe it's also giving staff greater ability to, make some of those exceptions as well, if it's a project that doesn't meet that threshold of having to go to the DRB. So that's something we can certainly look at. But the DRB does have the full authority to grant exceptions to Chapter 4, which has the design guidelines, and Chapter 8, which has the landscaping requirements.
And Jesse, if it came to setbacks, who gets to appeal that and vary that?
So if it's a variance to the setbacks, that does go to the Board of Zoning Appeals, the BZA.
Okay.
However, we do have in Chapter 2 a section for infill setbacks, whereas if it's a block that everything's set back 30 feet from the road on that one block, and the new zoning says it needs to be 10 feet from the road, staff can approve the 30-foot setback.
Okay,
so it's in line with the infill on the rest of the block. But I think it's having folks understanding that the staff can approve that. I think it may not be as clear to people that that's something that can be done. Because I know in the area you were talking about earlier, Tom, that kind of North Magnolia, North Gum Street area. I think applicants, there have been a couple applicants that maybe weren't aware that they could have, kept their buildings further back from the road if they so chose. But they thought they had to bring it up to the property line because that's what the ordinance states in the chart for setbacks. But later on in the Chapter 2, it does talk about the infill ability to address that. So I think maybe making that clearer as well, or making it, I don't know, clearer, more obvious, is something else to consider.
Jesse, we added a couple months ago a little bit more flexibility to for you guys. Also, would that affect setbacks?
It can, yeah. We added the administrative adjustment, which allows for a 10% variance at staff approval rather than having to go to the BZA. So depending on what the requirement is, it's usually only about a foot or so. I mean, at the most in terms of setbacks would go, but it can make a difference because you hate to make someone go through a whole process when they're only asking for half a foot of encroachment type of thing. So.
Yeah, this is Tim McCall, the zoning administrator. We actually had a case where we applied that after it was approved by Planning Commission to use the administrative adjustment. We had a property, a lady could not fit a house on her lot just because it was a very narrow lot, but she was only over by like 6 inches on each side. So we were able to approve her to move forward without having to go to BZA for 6 inches. And I just wrote the letter, said this meets the intent of the UDO. You're good to go. And she was able to get her permit to move forward with that project. And that was a small, narrow infill lot close into downtown.
Yeah, I think that was one of our more recent additions that we made.
Yes.
Does anybody have anything else they'd like to add, or Mr. Chairman?
Let me ask you a question. Are we supposed to have a public hearing at our next meeting to do this for council, right?
I believe those are council's
plan.
wishes. Mhm.
Okay. And we're here from people then. And are we supposed to come up with an alternative, or to report back to council our thoughts on this, whether that we should get rid of the UDO or not, or compromise or do something, or what? Do we have specific instructions other than holding a public hearing?
I think staff was directed to come up with, to take the old ordinance and gather information and figure out which parts of the new ordinance we thought were the most important that needed to be brought back to the UDO. So I think any input you guys have for that'll kind of be put into our draft that we will get back, or the suggestions we'll make to council. And we hope to have those suggestions to you guys as soon as we can, because obviously you'll have to have a public hearing on that.
Okay. Well, one idea I have is if you look at downtown mixed use DMX and the photographs at 2.4.3, let's see what page, it's on page 14.
Okay,
of the UDO.
Let me turn to that real quick,
Just
Tom.
a second. Let me get that.
What page?
It's page 14 of the UDO.
Okay, I'm almost there.
Yeah.
Here we go. Okay.
And I'm looking at 2.4.3,
Okay.
the series of photographs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what that's kind of like a pictorial view of the design standards. And that applies to Little Main, and it applies to North Gum Street. And I think that's part of the problem. And is there a designation that we can change for that area, North Gum, Cedar Street, those transitional areas, so they don't have to go directly to this kind of development? I mean, I like this look and everything, but that's for that works in some areas and doesn't work everywhere. And
So one of my questions would be if there's a vacant lot in these areas, or if, as Miss Elaine mentioned, there was a building that was torn down, are you guys okay with it being brought up to these standards at that point? Or do you think those should be changed in general?
well, I think isn't that the
Well,
problem?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's, if you visualize right there on North Cedar Street, but the new building that's being built according to the new guidelines, because it's close to the sidewalk, right beside United Bank that used to be Community First Bank, and between that and Mustard and Five Loaves.
Mm-hmm.
That's being built to the new standards, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
It's an office building that's evidently they're selling the office space for that. Well, I think that instead of necessarily requiring, I think that it needs to be a good neighbor with the surrounding area, more so than to artificially apply certain design standards towards something. I think that overall we want to have a more aesthetically pleasing town, but that is not necessarily mean that it needs to be cookie cutter or uniform. I think that there's a lot of charm in buildings done in different eras and reflecting the time in which they were built, and the idiosyncrasies of maybe even design, not necessarily fads, but trends perhaps. So the downtown mixed use area, I'm not sure whether it should necessarily be brought up all the way to the new standards, or whether it could be a blend so that it just needs to fit into the town.
What I was suggesting is that this is fine for some parts of downtown, but not for other parts of downtown. And is there
Exactly.
a way that we can change it and come up with a different designation for those other areas. I mean, if somebody bought a whole block on South Magnolia, South Gum, that area, I mean, North Magnolia, North Gum, in that area, or Cedar there, they could bring it up to these standards. But one building alone
Right.
jutting out to the road or coming close to it is not going, it's going to look funny. And then the rest are staying there.
Exactly.
And some of them may change in 5 years, but some of them may not change for 30 years. You know,
I agree.
yeah.
But we had that issue along Main Street, where the old Shoney's was, which is now Kickin' Chicken. You know, there's still a few houses scattered in there along North Main Street.
Mm-hmm.
There were once residences, but are now converted to business use. And I believe there may even be one residence still.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that needs to be allowed for.
So I think a step I would suggest is that we look at the map and look at the designations and see which are there certain specific areas that are trouble spots where maybe we need to change those designations. And that way we can preserve a lot of the UDO, the new developments out on Maple Street and things like that. I think UDO works great personally. But in some of the areas, maybe we want to come up with an alternative standard for those areas, but then have other areas like Little Maine and, you know, here, this picture of Piazza there on Cedar, Short Cedar, Short Central, works. And I think we should keep that personally. So that's kind of what my thoughts would be. Let's look at it and see where we can preserve it, what areas we can preserve it, and what areas need to be changed, rather than throwing out the whole UDO.
Okay.
Is there a possibility then, I'm hearing a lot of members of the Planning Commission basically wanting to do the reverse of what kind of our directive was from Town Council, that we would like to perhaps incorporate some of the old ordinances into this newer document instead of vice versa. And it would be interesting to see if council would be willing to bear with us and work toward something we can all be happy with.
So are we suggesting, or Tom, are you suggesting that we would keep the new zoning classifications versus the old? So the downtown mixed use would stay the same, but the central business district and B3 that was previously in those downtown areas would go away as it has, basically. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, I'm saying that we use the downtown mixed use for some areas downtown, but not all. And then
Okay.
we come up with a different designation for some of the other areas.
There are certain areas, I'm just thinking of one on North Gum Street that I've had listed in the past, and it was heavy industrial previously, and
Mhm.
then it got
Oh,
down to downtown mixed, which completely changed the whole.
is that between the
purpose.
post office and 78?
It's actually between the dog
Railroad
leg
track.
corner of Gum Street and the post office.
Yes, okay.
Well, I think if I had heard Mr. McIntosh and the other folks correctly, they essentially said they don't want to mess with the what we have for zoning in the UDO. They want to retain that. Because as they said that there are a lot of people that liked the new classifications because there were a lot more latitude to be able to do things with their property under the classification. As I was saying earlier, what I was hearing, and maybe I was hearing it through a filter, but what I was hearing was the primary thing that they have objections to are the design regulations. And you can have those zoning classifications with the allowances or the permitted by rights and that sort of thing without specifying a lot of heavy design requirements. That's just like I say, that's what I was hearing through my filter. I know all of us hear things differently when they come out.
Right.
Do you recall Bill talking about user-based or use-based zoning versus form-based? Jesse or Rebecca, do you know? Can you give us a description of what that means? I've looked it up, but it still doesn't make any sense to me.
So the form-based versus use-based, obviously use-based is your normal Euclidean type zoning where it's, you have a parcel that is zone C2, whatever, and you can do these commercial uses to it. Your form-based is more of our mixed use districts that we have that allow for some residential, some commercial uses, neighborhood commercial to be together. But what you're worried about then is not necessarily the use, it's the appearance to where everything can look the same, although there may be completely different uses side by side. The appearance and the aesthetics are still the same.
Okay, so for a form-based zoning example, it might be something along the lines of North Magnolia, where you have homes next to businesses that look like homes.
Could be, yes.
Yeah.
But if you're building, then obviously you would be building an area where you could have mixed use. You could have residential on top of commercial. You could have commercial uses that look like they're in houses, that sort of thing.
Okay, all right.
Imagine like a downtown Bluffton or something of that nature, where you're using like a somewhat of a, if you're near residence, you're using like a neighborhood commercial versus a strong commercial.
Right. Okay. Yeah, makes sense. Well, that was easy.
I think the mixed use, and I wasn't here at that point, but the mixed use categories we have are kind of where we incorporated the form-based code ideals, where you can do it. It doesn't require that you do it, but you have the opportunities in those areas to do it.
And so maybe people are not picking up on the fact that it's not required. But do you think that's I'm still just so confused by by the intent of the.
I think there's some inherent flexibility in the ordinance that's not being recognized. If that's
that was, I thought that the fact that there was a lot of flexibility was one of its strong points.
Right, and I think it's
so,
yeah. Folks,
maybe some people are not seeing that it's flexible.
I think maybe folks aren't seeing it, and maybe we're not being given the opportunity to explain it as well as we should. I'm.
Yeah.
Well, I definitely think that whatever comes out of this process, that we need to do some public engagement afterwards and talk and try to, get it to where more people understand the process and more people understand the flexibility that's in it. Even our own staff, so that we're fully kind of aware of what we can and can't do and what kind of the intent is that we're trying to reach. I think, we want to be business friendly, but I moved here when I was 7 and grew up here. But, one of the great things about Somerville is its appearance. And the only way you continue that appearance is to take the design elements that we all know and love, but put those into some sort of regulatory document so that that's continued, so that it's replicated as new people come in who aren't aware or don't care. about kind of, the things that we like about our town now. But, you have to have some sort of standards to be able to make new owners and new businesses replicate the things that we all like here. And I think that it's hard for a normal person who doesn't deal with zoning or land development to kind of understand. They think, you look at all of these regulations and you think that they're really strict. But most people, if you gave them, if you put one building beside another building, they could tell you which one they liked, and they could maybe tell you, one or two things they like about it, but they couldn't tell you how you got there. And unfortunately, zoning and design standards, that's how you get there. It's those little regulations that make the physical appearance look different, that even though the normal citizen probably has no idea what it is, those are the requirements that kind of get you to where we are now, which is having a really attractive city.
Right, and actually an awful lot of it as a design professional is that good design is the determining factor and style is not. So in order to be aesthetically pleasing, it matters whether you're following the elements of good design more so than whether you're following Southern style or a particular style, such as Victorian or Federal or modern or whatever, so that design matters.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it
And
that way, but yeah.
And so the principles of design are a lot of what's spelled out. That's a lot of what the Board of Architectural Review does in their meetings, or they try to make things that are meant to look historically correct be historically correct if they are attempting a historical. In other words, if you're going to attempt to build a replica of a Federal style, then it needs to look like that. And it needs to be a correct interpretation and not something that's just slapped together. So I think that some of the design standards are meant that way rather than maybe the way that other people are seeing them.
Yeah, Elaine, that's a good point. We had this discussion, a similar discussion with our DRB on Thursday. And I think one of the things that came out of that was yes, folks not necessarily focusing on the specific, I have to have this much of this and this much of that, but coming in with good design and good design intent to begin with. And then if that means you don't necessarily meet this requirement of the design guidelines, but you've got a good design overall, then that's something the DRB can approve an exception to. Like that it's
well,
but,
one of the least attractive buildings in town on Main Street is the Holly Hill Bank building that was built at great expense. And it's got great big columns, and it's got so many elements that, were evidently designed to scream Southern design. And yet I think it falls on its face as far as being an example of good design.
yeah. I think
I'm sure I may be in the minority in feeling that way about that building, but I don't think that it is an asset to the community, and I think it was meant to be.
Yeah, it doesn't fit.
It has to do with context as well. And I think that's the other thing that gets lost in the ordinance that's there, but it gets lost is that kind of what Tom's talking about. Just because you may have the same form of development in DMX that you have in, on Little Maine and North Gum may call for the same form of development where you have your parking behind and the building's brought up to the road, doesn't mean it has to have the same style. It doesn't mean you have to have a
Right.
flat roof. It doesn't mean you know that it has to look like an office building. The ordinance does talk about context and what the existing buildings surrounding the property look like, and that should be taken into account. And I think that gets lost in all the other pieces of it. So I think
Yeah,
maybe putting
I
more
agree.
emphasis on that and adding some pictures to the DMX example that aren't all the same, that aren't, you know, all the buildings right next to each other brought up to the road, you know, some like that are, you know, maybe smaller residential
Converted
style,
houses.
but they're still
Yeah.
bumped to the road, but they're not all connected and they're smaller residential style. So you make it obvious that just because it needs to meet this form doesn't mean that they all have to look the same, that they all have to be
Right.
the same style. And that's definitely something we could do better with our picture examples and our graphic examples, because I mean, it's the same thing. When you look at the graphics, when you go into here, these all look, like you said, Tom, like the little Main Street, but that's not what all the DMX is going to look like. You know, just because it calls for that doesn't mean it has to all look the same. So I think that's definitely something we can work on as well. Because
Yeah,
I mean, this
show how that-
house here would pretty much meet DMX standards. Because I mean, it's right up at the road and it takes up, you know, a good portion of the frontage, but you know, so it's just making it more obvious that just because it meets the same form doesn't mean it has to look exactly the same. I think is a key component that we heard from the DRB as well, and have heard from y'all. So that's, but again, as you said, Elaine, that's more making changes to the UDO, not taking the old ordinance and adding stuff to it. So I mean, the one thing Rebecca and I are having difficulty with is how exactly to take the old ordinance and add stuff from the UDO to it.
Yeah, you know, a lot of graphics would need to be added to it. A lot of language would need to be changed, and the numbering system and the organization of it would need. There's so much that would need to be changed to make it a viable instrument for today's world.
Yeah,
That
and I think
I
we're,
think
you know, we're trying to
that
work through all
it'd be
that.
easier to work the other way. I think it'd be easier to work the other way if council would just consider that.
Well, I would encourage you to talk to your council members, and as we work through this process, we'll continue to come up with ideas. And if you come up with anything else, like I said, please email or call Jesse and I. I had never even seen the old ordinances until about 3 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. So I'm kind of looking, you know, trying to figure that out also. But we want to, you know, we want to make sure we're doing what council is asking for and what, you know, the people who use it the most are asking for also. So we're trying to incorporate everybody's suggestions.
I do not envy you.
That's why we get paid the big bucks.
Oh, right, sure. Just rolling in it.
We can make it happen. So,
Do we need to do anything, or should we do anything before the public hearing as a panel or as our group?
Not specifically that I'm aware of. Like Rebecca said, we'll try and get you a draft of you know, we'll work hard to get you a draft to use for the public hearing. And you know, I feel like this is going to be a process. I know. Ideally, I know they want it as quickly as possible, but I don't. Realistically, I'm not sure how to do that. Rebecca and I will try our best to get you something you can work with for the public hearing. But I think even Mr. McIntosh said in the meeting that it may take more than one meeting with the Planning Commission. You know, so
I would like to see a workshop with town council and the planning commission together so that of course it's so difficult to do things remotely and it's so much easier when you can get together and work them out, or maybe it sounds like it would be, but it sure would be advantageous to have a workshop with some of the members of town council or more input into expanding the possibilities for fixing the problems.
Hey, Jim,
Yeah,
I'm new at this game, so I'm not quite sure I know all that I need to know about the procedures, but I do know that you're talking about is old ordinance, new ordinance. You should change that to existing ordinance program. So we need to change or amend new ordinances. It goes to the existing ordinance concept that we have now. Is that clear on what I'm telling you?
yeah, I understand what you're saying, Charlie. We really
Right.
don't have a new ordinance on the table because the UDO has been adopted. So what we're dealing with is,
Yeah,
so
it was
they're,
adopted more than a year ago.
yeah, so it's not a new ordinance. It is the existing ordinance that they are going to, their intention right now is to repeal the existing ordinance and replace it with the ones that were prior to it.
Okay.
So the negotiation now is how much of the existing ordinance can we convince town council to retain as we move forward with the process.
Rebecca, can I ask you one more question? You mentioned previously that the UDO is a combination of the land development ordinance and zoning code classifications. And so how does that differ from what we previously had?
So the UDO just puts it all in one document. So you would have had road requirements. Those actually randomly were in the planning commission chapter. But you would have had, if you're going to build a development, the things you need are going to be road, stormwater, floodplain if you're in a flood, use with the uses and the zoning is going to come your setbacks and landscaping requirements and things like that. So before, those were in separate areas and the UDO puts them together. So I guess that's the best way to say that's how they differ. Things like road requirements were in a different section, stormwater was in a different section, and floodplain was in a different section.
And there was no real connection between all of them other than you had to do these things, but they were shotgun throughout the town ordinances.
And that's because of the way it's because they were done as an issue came up, it was added to the ordinance.
Right.
So it was not done in compact chapters or they don't necessarily relate.
And you could take those chapters and fold them into the planning chapter, the latest chapter, and I'm not 32, if you wanted to. There's no limitation to the topics they can be in a code chapter. So you could take that and then have separate sections underneath it that deal with the different things. So you could combine those if you wanted to. Floodplain management came along at one time, and the requirements for that, though we had to meet for federal law. Those went in. So that's probably when that ordinance came. Stormwater management,
right.
The same. When you put in the fee, that probably affected some of that too. So that's when that went in.
We didn't have a road ordinance when I came to this town. We just
Didn't
followed
have-
cows.
Rebecca and Jessica, if I can help you in any way between now and our next meeting, please feel free to reach out and contact me. I'll come meet with you. We can do something by Zoom if you want to email me things, and I'm happy to work extra. I wasn't on the panel when the UDO first came through. I think my first meeting after I joined was the meeting after it was sent to council. So I missed all that work. So I'm happy to put in my share of the labor now. But I've got to run now. That's why I'm saying it. I've got to leave the meeting. But I'm happy to work with you if you can use me in any way.
Thank you.
Well,
I hereby
thank you.
nominate Tom Hart for X.
Yeah.
Well, I know we've taken up an hour of your time, so if anybody, I really appreciate y'all talking and giving us your ideas. And if you come up with anything else, please just reach out to Jesse or I, or reach out to your council member, and we'll do our best to try to incorporate everybody's concerns in there and come up with the best replacement that we can come up with.
What's the next step, Becky?
I'm going to take off. Take care, everyone.
Thanks,
Hi,
Tom.
Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
We'll continue to work on how we work with the old ordinance, and then you'll have a planning commission meeting on March 15th, and there'll be a public hearing there about it. As soon as we have something to give to you, to show you, we'll get that to you so you can start having comments for it.
Rebecca, is there any chance we could meet in the council chambers with the mask ordinance?
We're gonna
goes to the
try
14th.
to, Kevin. Yeah, we'll try
Okay.
to for that public hearing, because that's, otherwise it's gonna be almost impossible. Yeah,
Exactly. It'd be a Zoom circus.
yes.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah, we're slowly going to try to transition our council meetings back to regular meetings too, with social distancing and limiting number of people in the room. But I think for conversation purposes and things, it is more, helpful to have everybody in the same room.
Thank you.
Yes,
Right, which is one thing that I think the timing for this is
terrible.
unfortunate because it inhibits public participation. And public participation was a primary thing that occurred during the formation of the UDO and during all of the work that went into it.
That's a really good point. It'd be a shame to eliminate the UDO without any public input.
Well, it's kind of like the 7 council members against the citizens of Somerville.
Yep.
Who knows where anybody stands
Mhm.
unless you can, have a more open and transparent get together.
Okay, well, if there's nothing more, folks, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion we
I've
adjourn.
talked enough. I move that we adjourned.
I have a motion
Second.
and a second. All in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you,
guys.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.